friends. Welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. We're going to have a phenomenal conversation today with my special guest, Jordan Maroon. I'll tell you a little bit more about him shortly. But I think this is going to be a great episode because we're going to be diving into a topic that surprisingly we really haven't talked about much in all of the episodes of Space for Life. And that's going to be kind of the integration or the connecting points between our lives of faith, wherever we happen to be in that walk, and the things that we do at work, who we are and how we act and how we kind of exist in the workplace. And Jordan is going to be a phenomenal person to share about this because his whole work as executive director of Needle's Eye Ministry is that connecting point between our faith life and our work life. And so Jordan's going to be a great asset for, I think, just having a rich, beneath the surface level kind of conversation about this place that I think for a lot of people is a place of sometimes confusion and sometimes a little bit of discomfort about how do I do this faith and work together. So Jordan is the guest for today, and Jordan is a fellow Richmonder.
Yes, I am. Yep.
Grew up in Richmond. Welcome to Space for Life. A graduate of CNU, Christopher Newport University. And after Christopher Newport, and I'll have him tell the story in a lot more detail, worked for 10 years with InterVarsity Ministry, which I'm very familiar with, was involved with InterVarsity at Davidson College back a long time earlier. Is married to Crystal and has 3 kids, and has been with Needle's Eye Ministry, which we'll talk a lot more about later in the episode, since 2016, and has been executive director since 2021, doing a phenomenal job, having an incredible impact throughout Richmond with Needle's Eye Ministry. So real excited to have Jordan. Jordan and I have known each other now probably for about 4 or 5 years. Here and there, but have had some great connecting points. So welcome to Space for Life.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy. Honored to be here. Really glad to be part of this conversation and just a privilege to be on the show. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go back a few episodes in Space for Life, one of the episodes that I aired probably maybe a month or 2 ago was reversing the roles.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Where I was actually a speaker at an event of Needle's Eye Ministry called Spiritual Shots, which is such a cool beer and pizza event.
Yeah.
And interviewing someone, and you actually interviewed me for that. So turnaround's fair game. And since I get the last word in, you better watch out.
Yes, sir. You got it. I will be on my toes.
Yeah, it's great. So let's begin. I'd love for you to just kind of tell those who may not know you
Sure.
a little bit about yourself and kind of what got you to this place.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up in Midlothian in the South Side to great parents and have a younger brother. I became a Christian when I was 8. And even if I wasn't talking about faith, I was just talking about markers in my life. That early stage of being a Christian really kind of shaped me, because what happened for me was we were in what I would say we had a great family life. We're in a good church. I really appreciated kind of the wonderful people in the church, the leadership, the things they taught me. But for me, I believed that God loved me, but functionally, I took on my identity that I was the good kid. I was the kid who wouldn't do anything wrong, wouldn't cause any problems. And so that became sort of who I was. And there were some positive motivations for that, as there can be. You know, I loved my parents and respected them. I had a strong sense of right or wrong, some good things. But the challenge was that there was a whole lot of fear underneath it. And so I really was concerned that if I took one misstep, it could be small in the scheme of things, that God, but also important adults in my life would reject me.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have a formative experience that told me that that would happen. I mean, for some people, if they had that, it would be connected to this traumatic thing that happened, or that. I didn't have that, but some part of my internal life just latched on to that sense. And I remember that I would, when I was 16, 17 years old, I would go to bed and I would run through my head anything I could think of that I had done wrong that day, to tell God I was sorry for it, because I was afraid that if I died in the night, that I wouldn't be forgiven for that thing. I didn't have anybody tell me that. That's not what the Bible says. It's not what my parents were telling me. My parents were not authoritarian or, frightening people for me to be around. They're very compassionate and loving people. But that was very much what I latched onto. I to this day, I'm not entirely sure what that is. So I didn't have a rebellious phase as a high schooler or middle schooler. And again, some of that was positive, but some of that was very fear based.
Right.
And so I kind of grew up in this space of, I want to do the right thing. I do care about other people. That's some of the driver. I'm very afraid of how other people will think about me, specifically in terms, not, some people have that because they need to accomplish a certain amount of things, or be perceived as this level of athlete or this level of intellect. I didn't have those things. It was the morality piece. I needed people to think that I was a good person, because if they didn't, I was afraid they would reject me.
Well, that's so interesting. I think I commonly also grew up as someone that was kind of the good, easy
Mm.
to get along with kid, but I didn't have that fear
Hmm.
element. So it sounds like you had this tension between um, really deeply wanting to be the way you were, but also afraid not to be the way you were.
Hmm.
Which um, that's interesting. Kind of
Yeah.
what's a root of that fear-based thing, but it's I imagine pretty common amongst people that there's an underlying fear of what would happen if I wasn't the way I was, if I
Yeah.
didn't follow the rules, if I didn't play the game the way I'm supposed to play the game.
I think that's right. And I think if you grow up in a church or in a faith community that is pretty strong, that has strong in a positive way, that has a strong impact on you, I think it's at least possible that you would do maybe more like what I did, which is I latched onto this true idea, that I'm forgiven by God. That was easier-ish for me to accept. It was very easy for me to accept that God loved and forgave other people. I had no trouble with that. But but I think the harder thing was, does God like me? Does God act like, is it sort of, God is contractually obligated to love me because of this thing that Jesus did? And so he does, maybe begrudgingly, maybe compassionately, or is it that but does God, or do people like me for me if I'm not all of these things I am doing that are good, right? Do people value, when I'm 17 or 25, do they value me because I benefit them in some way? Does God value me because I benefit him, because I'm doing good things that he wants me to do? Or does he value me just for me underneath all of
Is he
that?
just putting up with
Yeah, that might be a good way to put it.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting because I didn't really grow up in a church.
Hmm.
We were twice a year Episcopalians
Yeah. Yeah.
growing up. So functionally, we really were not church people. So I didn't have those layers. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people who have up in the church, there are all of these subtle types of
Hmm.
messages. Even when you talk about, you know, God forgives us. Well, that's kind of implying we're desperately in need of forgiveness
Yeah.
and not um, not valued.
Sure.
Just God's putting up with us. So there's these subtle messages uh, that come through that I think are things people have to grow through.
That's
Anyway,
right.
that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say, in the church I grew up with, as far as I know, it's not like everybody that came through, the youth group when I did all had a similar challenge. I don't know that the church was necessarily, I wouldn't say they were imposing this on me.
Right.
I think, but there was a sense of, as there is for lots of people, there was a focus, I think, or at least that I internalized on how bad I am more than how loved I am. And I'm sure they talk about
Wow.
both
Yeah.
maybe in equal measure, but I very easily picked up on this idea that yeah, you're a
Yeah.
sinner, you're all these things, um, and so it really drove a lot of my decision making. And if I carry forward my story a little bit, so I go to Christopher Newport, and in my mind with college, my sort of thought was, um, ultimately I'm going to go into public service or public office or public policy. My dad worked in the nonprofit space, and I really respected kind of how he thought about impacting the community through that. And he had worked around state government, and so I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm really fascinated by people and politics, and this is what I'm going to pursue. Went to college, had a great experience at Christopher Newport. Could talk about that a lot, but ended up in my senior year actually feeling compelled to instead consider this campus ministry career instead, where I was really set up to actually, by then, I was going to do business, or I was going to go into political science to get a master's degree and then go serve in some way. And I think that it became, I think that genuinely that's what I was sort of built to do. I think that's what, as a person of faith, I would say God wanted me to do. But even just now knowing more of myself, this kind of space that I've operated in professionally fits kind of who I am. But at the time, some of it was, well, this is what you kind of should do, quote unquote, right?
Mm.
That sense of compulsion. There's like a gracious invitation into it, and then there's a pressure of doing the right thing kind of into it. And so I did that and loved it. I love college kids, and they have it's such a great intersection of people who are becoming very much more self-aware than they've been,
Right.
asking tons of good questions, are pretty intelligent, but have an awareness that they don't know everything.
Right.
And so to work with students at UNC Chapel Hill and at Wake Forest University was a really great opportunity to just be a part of these kids' journeys. And kids is probably not helpful, but young people, be part of these wonderful young people as they wrestle through things. And one of the things that happened for me during that time was there was this intersection of when after we got married and I came and I was back on staff at UNC Chapel Hill, we had this year and a half where it felt like every student that we were privileged to serve all of the sudden was wrestling with some huge piece of their identity or a big trauma from their past they had never divulged and processed through. And so there was this period of time where it felt like really we were sort of a ministry in triage, connecting people to counseling and having these wonderful, beautiful, messy conversations and trying to make sure we were resourcing people the way they needed it. And, but just loving on people who were just these wonderful young people, very willing to be honest about their questions and their suffering. And it was really powerful. And around the same time, for the first time in my life, I went through some real tragedy and suffering in the context of my family and some things that were happening to us. And for me, what happened was because I was really stuck in I need to do the right thing all the time, connected to that for me was I need to think the correct way all the time. So I was sort of obsessive about theology, and I love theology today. I think it's extremely necessary and helpful to have a strong understanding of why you believe what you believe. But for me, I would have been, let's say 2 years prior, much more likely to kind of argue with you about theology than pay attention to what are you experiencing and feeling underneath the thing you're saying, and where are you kind of hurting, or where are you struggling, or where are you joyful, or where are you excited. I would have jumped to the word choice you're using and tried to correct it. That was kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah, and it would seem like the other, the flip side of that might have been, tell me if it's correct, that you perhaps didn't give yourself permission to struggle, or
I'm sure that's true. That is
give
true.
yourself
Yes.
permission to have doubts, to say, okay, I know this is the right answer. Underneath the surface, I'm really not sure I believe
Yeah.
this thing, but this is the answer. So I am all in to that. And, and you bring up um, the identity and trauma,
Hmm.
and it sounds like, in a sense, you were also individually having those two things happen in your life. That is, you were dealing with some trauma,
Hmm.
but you also had a really, um, could I say, rigid identity.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good way to frame it. I would say that the way that I tried to be a good person or navigate my life was tightly controlled. I was
Yes.
very like I had no sense of my own emotions because I controlled them all the time, right?
Right.
And then it was this theological rigidity, by which I don't mean just believe whatever you believe. What I actually mean is I really put having good theology as like the reason that God would approve of me, along with being a good kid. It was like a fear based grappling with having everything right. Because that was my behavioral pattern, but that was also my sort of mental, intellectual, theological pattern. And I also genuinely wanted to be a good friend and good husband and like I did care
Yeah.
about people, but there was
Yeah.
this other thing. And then to your point, once we went through some tragedy and suffering, what I found was the theology didn't help me. That what I actually needed was God. What I actually needed was people. What I actually needed was to be connected to my own experience and feelings of suffering. And so for me, what happened was this sort of scaffolding in my life that I had developed that had built out a structure that I could live in and sort of knew how to navigate kind of got blown up because things were happening that I couldn't control, didn't know how to wrap my head around. And I was kind of falling apart as you do. And what I found was I didn't have a theology of suffering, but I also just didn't know how to talk. I didn't know how to be honest with myself about how I felt about things. I didn't really know how to connect deeply with my emotional world and then share that with other people, especially other men. And but the other thing that happened was, wow, it gave me such compassion and empathy for my friends, but also my students I was working with that I just didn't have before. I think I would have intellectually cared about them. I mean, I cared. It wasn't that I was callous, but it was different to go, oh, now I know what it's like to suffer, or I know what it's like to wrestle with these deep things. And so when you're sharing it with me, I know how precious a gift that is that you would share this really
Right.
painful story with me. Thank you for the honor of hearing that and just walking with you, because you need somebody to walk with you, not somebody to tell you all the right answers.
Yeah. I did a whole series, I guess maybe at the beginning of the year. And it was around this idea that we cannot give to someone else what we haven't received
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
That's right.
We can't take someone to a place we haven't been ourselves. And it's not because we don't want to. It's we are literally not capable of
Mm-hmm.
doing it. So, all of your desires, and God really kind of almost in his mercy, I think, um, tears down our
Yeah,
scaffolding.
absolutely.
And yeah, so that's really, that's neat. I love that.
Well, and the you never, for me personally, I'm not somebody who thinks that you always have to see the good side of everything. I remember having a conversation with somebody who I love and respect, an older friend in ministry, as we were going through things. And one of the things that he was concerned about and said to me was something to the effect of, I'm concerned, Jordan, that when you process how you're feeling, that it feels like you're just trapped in darkness and you can't see the light. And God wants you to get out of the darkness and come into the light. And you just need to not be stuck there. And I really thought about what he said because I respect him a lot. I knew
Sure.
that he wasn't just throwing a trite phrase at me. This is somebody who really cared about me and my family. But what I ended up saying to him, which really encapsulated my experience at that time, was, I'm in like a bottomless pit right now. I don't see any light, but I don't think God's outside of the pit, shaking his head in frustration at me. I think Jesus is in here with me. And I think when I am able to just be raw about how I'm feeling, that's actually where I have experienced Jesus the most profoundly in this place. It's not And what would have happened for me prior is I would have felt like I've got to emotionally and intellectually and maybe even morally, not that I was doing immoral things, but I need to get myself together,
Pull yourself up by your
pull up by the
bootstraps.
bootstraps,
Yeah.
right? And then when I am put together and when I'm doing the right things again and not just sort of an emotional wreck, well, then I can be of use to God, and then God will care about me, and then I can be with people. And so when I'm with, Tommy on his podcast, if the podcast existed and I was on it in 2005, I would have been saying, well, this is awful, but here's this quick,
Right.
easy answer to it. But I just found that living in that space of pain actually was very healing, um, and awful and tragic. And I wish it hadn't happened. But at the same time, to find that Jesus was with me there when I couldn't get off the carpet, right? When I could barely function, and my friends were there, right? My community valued my wife and I when we were falling apart and not just when we were leading a bunch of
Mm.
things. And my students, I felt like, wow, I have unintentionally probably postured myself with these great young people as that the best thing I can do is give them the right answers from the Bible. And it really shifted in my spirit to the best thing I can do is walk with them, and share what's going on in my life. I remember getting up and um, sharing some of the most raw and unprocessed things I had journaled, and just saying to him, listen, this, I want to offer this to you because you either have, because I'm talking to all of you, or you will go through some really terrible experiences and tragedy. And I just want you to hear what it looks like before you come out the other side, because this is where I'm at. And I still trust God. I'm not abandoning everything I believe, but just so you know, this is where I'm at, and I don't have all the answers. And I just want to share that with you because this is what it feels like to be where I am right now. And I did that in part because I had never heard anybody talk that way.
Yeah, man, that is so good. I think that one of the things that I think turns people off to
Mm,
faith and turns people off to the church is this sense that Christians are people who don't struggle,
yeah.
um, who can just quickly get over it, and and it is such an unreal facade that people can't relate to, and
Hmm.
I think it's so powerful when people can say, you know what, I'm really struggling. I might even be having some incredible doubts,
Hmm.
but God's still there.
Yeah.
God can handle my struggles. God will actually be with me in my struggles. God actually can handle my doubts.
Yeah.
Uh, that is a very freeing place, and I think that is actually the gospel. That's actually
Hmm.
the good news, and but yet it's so far different than some people have experienced in church, or at least people's impressions often
Hmm.
about church.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And people's inauthenticity, if that's the right way to say it, detectors are on full blast all the time. And everybody is paying attention to who's being real and who's being a little
Yeah.
bit dishonest. And I think for me, at the prior to all that, I wasn't being fake. If I had given somebody a quick theological answer, that was genuinely what I would have been feeling on the inside. But I was closed off to myself.
Right.
And I think the maybe the theological gap for me was that what God wants is exactly what you said. God wants us to live in a fullness of human existence with Him. He doesn't want us, as a Christian, shut off your emotions. As a Christian, ignore pain and suffering. That's not what God wants. God wants me to be fully who He has made me to be as a human being. And now in this life phase, as a leader and a husband and a father and a son and a friend and a brother and all these kinds of things, the fullness of that human experience and be honest about that experience, but walk with him in that experience, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I really thought that actually the way to love God and love other people was to kind of shove all that down so that I would have the right things to say. And
Right.
that really was, and that spoke to how I valued myself, which was not very highly now that I think about it. What I valued in myself was sort of moral and Christian productivity. that's really where my value was. It wasn't that I'm a person who's loved by God and loved by my wife and my friends and my parents and my family, and have some value and dignity just in who I am, not just because I'm doing all these hopefully good and effective things.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's so good. I think those are struggles so many people have.
Hmm.
It's almost a form of Christian bondage type
Absolutely,
of
it is. Yeah.
thing. But it's just the growth place that a lot of us. I mean, we are as much as we talk about being authentic in our culture, we also are incredibly good across the board, Christians, non-Christians, of putting on airs,
Yes.
putting on facades to appear a particular way.
Hmm.
And some of the deepest growth, and it happens often out of suffering, is that place where you become vulnerable
That's right.
about that life isn't always easy, and
Hmm.
that I'm not always good, and I'm not always happy, you know.
I think you're right. And I think being able to accept not only your life situation, but just accept yourself. I think that's really difficult for people to do. And just to say, this just is who I am. This is who I feel. I don't have to critique myself. I mean,
Yeah,
not that, there are things that we do that are better and worse for the sake of ourselves and others. I'm not dismissing those. I'm just saying, if I feel the way I feel, it's just how I feel. If I'm wrestling with doubt in the way that's just what I'm wrestling with. And I don't have to condemn myself for it. I can live authentically in that place and then think about what are healthy ways to move forward.
sure. Yeah, we are works in progress.
Yeah, that's right.
And if we can, as you say, accept ourselves, still with the desire and the vision to grow
Yes, that's right.
further
Yeah.
out of those stuck
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
Some people kind of, I think, use that, I'm not perfect as an excuse to just stay where
Yeah,
they
right.
are.
Right.
So anyway, a lot of growth. That's incredible.
That's right. If I'm a jerk and I just say to my wife, well, this is who I am, you just have to deal with it. Well, that's not right, because
Yeah.
I should be trying to be a more loving husband.
Yeah.
I shouldn't just accept that. But I think living in the tension of contentment with who you are and a sort of a desire and a vision for who you want to be, and as a Christian, who God wants you to be and
Yeah.
become. But for me, a big shift was to understand that it was this loving invitation from God to get there, not that he's mad at me that I'm not already there. And that's what I used to think, that he was so frustrated with me that I couldn't get it together, even as I'm doing everything I possibly could in my little finite way
Yeah.
to try to do it. And instead go, and now I have kids, and having kids is so helpful, because I think how my kids think about me is very important, but I want them to know that I love them. I want them to know that we have fun together and we laugh together, and I'm for them. I'm in their corner and I want to spend time with them. And I don't want them to, and if God is a better father than I am, how much more does he want that for all of us, right? It's not this place of fear and condemnation. I don't want my kids to be afraid of me. Are there rules I want them to follow because I think they're the best things for them and for us and for how we interact with the world? Absolutely. But I don't want them to be scared that dad is going to,
Withhold love
yeah,
and be
right,
disappointed
if they
and
don't
just
live
put
up to
up
my
with me.
standards. Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So let's transition for
Sure.
a minute. So you had, I mean, obviously a big growth phase,
Yes.
just as a human being,
Yeah.
in those years, college and I guess the 10 years with InterVarsity, and you transitioned to Needle's
Mhm.
Eye Ministry. Maybe it's a good opportunity to just explain briefly what Needle's Eye Ministry is, because that will be unfamiliar
Sure.
to a lot of
Happy to.
people. And so you made a move from a campus-based ministry to a workplace-based ministry.
That's right. So around 2015, we decided we wanted to make a change and wanted to move. Loved college ministry, but with where we were with our family and some uh, really challenging things happening with extended family, we wanted to get to Richmond, is what we decided. And what happened was, I had a mentor at the time, and we were kind of talking about how should I think about this next phase. And he said to me, I knew nothing about Needle's Eye at the time. He said, Jordan, you think that it's okay for any Christian to do any job. I had graduates from our campus ministry working at Google, and I had one in the White House, and I had them at P&G, and I had them as doctors, and all these different things. And you think that all those are great, except for you. Somehow you think that God will be mad at you, Jordan, if you do anything other than ministry. And so he said, you are not allowed to consider ministry as a career option.
Zing.
Yeah. I went, what? And so what was really fascinating for my transition was I spent about a year not looking at ministry jobs at all. Because in my mind, it was, well, now I'll go, finish my seminary degree and I'll go be a pastor. It was that kind of mentality. And so I started reading all of this theology of work and things that people had said about, look at how much the Bible talks about people's jobs. Think about how much time you spend in your work. I mean, most of us spend about 60% of our waking hours at work in our adult life. If God doesn't care about that, he doesn't care about most of your life. He doesn't care about you. And so I started understanding more of how God cares about all aspects of life, but also how the workplace is such a wonderful opportunity for us to care for people. And some of that is, how do you interact with your colleague? But some of that is doing your work with excellence. If the plumber that comes to fix my toilet is a Christian, but he does a terrible job, I kind of don't care as much about his faith story. I hope I do,
Yeah.
but I want my toilet to work, right? And so, or if your HVAC dies, right? You hope that the HVAC technicians that come out are people of morality and character. Maybe they share a faith with you, but really you just want your AC to work again, right? And so I started thinking about those things, and whether it's, CEO of a huge company or somebody in retail or somebody in all kinds of industries. And so that became really compelling to me for myself. So I started looking at all of these different job opportunities I never would have considered all over the country. But because we were honing in on Richmond and I started networking with people, well, then I heard about this organization, Needle's Eye Ministries. And Needle's Eye exists at that intersection of faith and work, right? And had been around since the late 70s in Richmond to try to help marketplace people connect to Jesus and then impact the city and their workplaces with him, with his values, ethics, and love. And by that time, after about a year, both my wife and I separately had come all the way around to, we think God is very open to us pursuing a ministry opportunity. But I was so glad for that chance to not think about ministry, to just think about vocation, and then to get offered this opportunity with Needle's Eye, which was doing exactly the thing that God had me wrestling with.
Right.
And so it was a really wonderful way, and yet had some similarity to college ministry, because college ministry is helping college students think about, in the context of being a college student, how do you live into who you are as a Christian? How do you build community? And how do you love and serve other people in Jesus' name, right? So how do I think about my professors and my parents back home and my roommates and my studies and my future career plans and my friends? How do you do that? Well, how do I think about my colleagues, my employers, my employees, the work that's before me, the stress that I face, the job opportunities I have, and how do I do that as a Christian in a way that, loves and serves the people around me and has me do the work with excellence and with the highest integrity, and in a way that serves the greater city and community, and thinks about those things. So it was familiar, but I had that opportunity to walk through sort of the thought process of what it would be like to step into a space about faith and work, and not just jump into being a pastor, where if I had done that, most of the people in my congregation would have worked in other industries, and I wouldn't have really understood what their day-to-day life was like.
Yeah.
For me, just to be clear, a lot of pastors do understand, but I wouldn't have personally.
Right. Yeah, and I've been familiar with Needle's Eye really almost since its inception, so I'm very familiar with it. And there's this tension in understanding what Needle's Eye is about that at least I have. I don't know whether other people would have this, as to whether what Needle's Eye is, it more about how am I supposed to be a Christian at work, or how can I, it's almost saying it the same way, how can I be a Christian at work? That is, work, how do I share who I am as a Christian at work, or how do I survive, in a sense, as a Christian at
Hmm.
work? Because work has so many demands, it has so many challenges, it has unique temptations. There are certain things like I had to think about in running companies.
Hmm.
You know, how do I reconcile um, my need to fire people for what they weren't doing
Yeah.
or
Right.
were doing with my compassionate Christian beliefs. And I didn't have a hard time
Hmm.
reconciling that, but I had to work it through in my mind. How can I be um, disciplining
Yeah.
people, holding them to a high standard, challenging them, whereas you had this little meek and mild
Right.
vision.
Right.
So that's the how do you be a
Yeah.
Christian? And yet, I think there's also this side that some people think that I'm supposed to be some different kind of person at home. I'm supposed to turn on my Christian thing at work. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
it definitely makes sense. So I think that regardless of any of the listeners, right, whatever they believe or don't believe about anything, right, so it doesn't matter what your spiritual life is. All of us at work have this sense of being impacted by the work in the workplace, and then wanting to have an impact back. So if you think about the workplace, so you've got your colleagues, you've got the tasks and responsibilities under your authority, you've got the opportunities, the stresses, you've got the culture of the workplace, the
Right.
values of the workplace. So if you're an employer, and I would love to hear more of your experience on that. Some of what you're doing, a lot of what you're doing is forming those things. You are assigning responsibilities and tasks, you're hiring people, you're firing people, you're creating culture, you're setting the values of the organization. The employee is figuring out how to navigate underneath that. Here's what my boss has told me I'm supposed to do. Here are the values that he or she has set. Here's what the culture is. And maybe I'm not in a position where I can shape the culture quite as much as somebody else. And I have to sort of navigate how that works. And whatever your belief system is, those things affect you, and you have an opportunity to affect them. And so anybody who's kind of thoughtfully grasping with their work and not just sort of trying to check out and just get through it is thinking about how is this affecting me, and how am I having hopefully a very positive impact back on each, my colleagues, my clients, my boss, the culture. So I think one of the things that we help people think about is, as a Christian, then what does it mean to take all of the Sunday stuff that you've learned, however long you've been a Christian? You hear these wonderful sermons from your pastor, you've been in Bible studies, you have your own personal study with God, you have your own relationship with God, you've spent time in prayer, you've learned all these things, you've been shaped in all these ways. And is that like a uniform that you take off when you leave the church and then you put on a different uniform when you go to work? Or is that authentic part of who you are, which is what we want people to do at work? I want somebody, even if they believe different than me, to be able to authentically show up in their workplace, right? And you have to do that in a way that is additive to the company, right? It can't be that if I walk in as a Christian and I'm so committed to telling everybody I'm a Christian that I don't do my job or I'm disruptive in the workplace, well, that's not helpful. That's not a good way to show up. So, but how do you take all of the things that God has built in you and formed in you and taught you, and then use that authentically in the workplace? Or I think a better way to say it is kind of what you said, which is, how do you just show up in who you actually are as a son or daughter of God?
Right.
And that is,
For good,
yeah,
bad, and ugly. I mean, because
that's right.
that's the way we all are.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a real challenge for people, because I think many of us have internalized sort of like what I had in the past, which is there are these sort of rules I need to follow, or there are these things that God is God upset with me that I haven't that I work in this cubicle, and I've got this person to my right, and I've got the cross on my cubicle, but I've never gone and said to her, hey, do you go to church? Do you want to go? He's got mad at me that I haven't done that. Is that what he wants me to do? Or does he
Right.
want me to sort of just be who he's made me to be, but in an intentional kind of way?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I have seen over the last uh, 10 or 20 years is kind of this elevation of this word authentic
Hmm.
in our culture. And it's one of the things that I actually genuinely like about the change
Yeah.
in culture. It seems like prior to that, um, things were so much more task oriented, and that we put on a particular persona.
Yeah.
And I think there is something that's so positive about trying to learn to be an authentic person, whoever you are, for good or bad, as long as we said, that's not kind of an excuse of just
Hmm.
staying
Hmm.
where we are. And I think we need a lot of help because it's tough. There are a lot of
Yeah.
challenges to it. So on one side, you have this, I want to learn to be authentic in a positive form to have a positive impact on work. Uh, the other side, though, I'm thinking about, and maybe you can say something to this, is um, we spend 60% of our time at work. That means it's also one of the places that God is able to do some
Hmm.
of his most significant work in us. That is,
Yes. Yeah.
work can impact us, work can teach us, work can challenge us. I know that, all of those years of learning business and
Hmm.
executing businesses, just did an episode with Sean Boyer, and we talked about the um, transitioning those lessons that we learned in running a business about how to set goals and develop mission and
Hmm.
guiding principles, how important that's been for our personal life. So we learn these lessons
Yeah.
instead of,
Yeah.
it's all about what we do to work.
Yeah.
It's also about what work can do in a positive form to us.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes what people need is they need an invitation to think that way.
Yeah.
I think for some of us, we're have the opportunity to work in roles where whether it's how people treat us or the freedom we have to kind of create and to lead, or maybe even the way that our contributions are recognized, might feel valued in a way, might feel like our work is valuable in a way, whereas somebody else maybe in a different professional setting might feel like, man, this is just drudgery. I just have to survive this. And sometimes what those people need is they need people to see them and respect them, but they also need to be invited into. But what if God is using this to form in you? And what if you have a lot more to offer from your professional life in a job that you think is a dead end job, but actually is so valuable and we're so appreciative? I mean, sometimes I think what is missing is that opportunity for people in jobs that maybe they wish they weren't in. Maybe they wish they had a
That's
different
so good.
career. Yeah,
Yeah.
to see the value of that. I've had the chance to do this a couple times, but one of the things I like to do when I speak at churches is just start talking about if as a the people in this room, we're people of faith, we're church attenders. You are where you are with God. Maybe you're a Christian, maybe you're wrestling, but most of us would probably say some of the most important work that somebody could do would be to stand up here as a pastor or go be a missionary. Wouldn't we all think that? Okay, yes. Well, then I just start listing off all of the careers I can think of that were necessary to get us into that space on Sunday morning. And I won't list them all because it takes a while, but everything involved with building that building and the maintenance of it. The urban planning, the people that paved the roads, the people that built the cars and the clothes and the food you ate, and the translators of the scriptures so that we can talk about it, and the electrical engineers so that we have this technology. I mean, just all of the things. And you go, if this is really important, then all of those careers and probably 100 I haven't thought of contributed to this, right? Who coordinating the shipping lines that got the chairs over, and you just go, all work is extremely valuable. And God uses everybody's job, I guess, unless it's illegal or immoral, right? If you're a gun runner, that's not a great job, right?
Yeah.
But basically anything else, it is blessing human beings. And if you're a Christian, you can do it in God's name to serve others. And it doesn't matter what the job is. I really don't think it does. I mean, all of us need, and we saw it with COVID. We saw the disruption of supply lines. And we started talking about certain jobs that maybe in the past, unfortunately, weren't honored and respected the way that they should. And now we were going, well, these are vital to the functioning of society, right?
Yeah.
And so I was talking to my kids about this because this is on my mind a lot with the work that I get to do. We were driving home and our trash had just been picked up. And I just started talking to them about how much I appreciate the men and women that work in sanitation and how hard it would be for society to function if we didn't have people just coming and getting the trash every week. And just that we ought to, if we ever have the chance to interact with those men and women, we ought to be so thankful to them and respect them. And do you think that they have people treat them well, and why or why not? And how could we treat them? Because I just think people's jobs are really, they are that place of formation, but I think they need the opportunity and they maybe need different eyes to see even themselves and the work they do as valuable. Because I think some people
Yeah.
are just not given that language for themselves.
Well, and I don't know what the stats are, but if you looked at the stats overall, I'm sure there's a pretty high percentage of people who, at some level, don't like what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. They don't like where they're doing it, or they don't like what they're
Yeah.
doing. So if you think, let's just say broadly, if that was 50%, what a need we have to learn how do we live well in a place we don't want to be.
Yes.
Because for a lot of people, we don't have the options. We
Yeah.
need to have a job. We need to stick with it. And so, there's so many different places that something like a needle's eye can speak to. And one of the things that I love that I've seen under your leadership that's been so great is kind of that focus on these words that you've used already, invitation and
Mm-hmm.
conversation. It's not about imposing and telling people how to do it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's aspects of it, but it's primarily an invitation to people of a way of being, and it's a conversation that we have, and that's so good, and that's so counter to the way so many people think of Christian
Mm-hmm.
things. But I love that about Needle's Eye, because if we could just, in most areas of culture today, if we could just have conversations,
That's right.
would be so much better off.
Yeah, and I am really thankful that that's something that you have picked up on. We are working. One of the things that matters to us is that the spaces we create, events and gatherings and groups, our idea behind them is that they are the place where you can have the most honest and real conversation that you feel comfortable with about faith and work in the intersection. Because when you're in your workplace, it can be hard to be honest about how challenging it is. When you're in your and not, I'm not saying come and complain, but let's just be honest about what it's
Right.
like. And in a lot of religious settings, regardless of the religion, people feel uncomfortable, or that they're not allowed to say, well, I'm not certain about this, or I'm wrestling with this. Or I know that, God loves me and he's real, but man, this thing in my life is really tough right now and he doesn't seem to be showing up. And so for us, we're like, people just need to be able to come and talk to each other and share openly and honestly. And yeah, and then sort of like you were saying, don't just be content in who you are, you want to grow. That's what we're trying to encourage people to do. Let's grow from there. But I think the starting point of growth is just honesty and relationship.
Yeah.
We help each other, right? But we can't really help each other if we're closed off.
Yeah. Gosh, such good stuff. So I want to, I think you've lived in this, this context for so long, and I'm sure thought about it so deeply. I want to, I guess, challenge you with a couple of questions that I think people have or wonder about. All right, so the first one would be, what do you see in today's world is the greatest challenge that is out there in the workplace? Is there one that kind of rises above the others?
That's a huge question.
It is a huge question.
I'm hesitant. I'm going to give you an answer.
I told you I was going to get
No,
back
I
at
know,
you.
I know. I'm going to give you an answer, but I think the most true thing for me to say is I don't know, because I think everybody's situation is so different. I mean, some of the workplace challenges are what they always were, which is how do I juggle all of these responsibilities in the finite amount of time and energy that I have, right? I mean, I think that as much as anything is balance, or not even balance, but just ordering priorities well and dealing with stress. I mean, those things are always going to be there. One of the things that I know is a huge thing for people now, and I've had many conversations about it, is in a way that maybe it didn't used to be, which is, to what extent do I need to, how do I grapple with or engage with the values or the maybe the ideology or the vision of a company that doesn't match mine? And
Hmm.
it seems like a lot of what's happening, whether you think it's wonderful or less wonderful or bad or great or somewhere in between, I think we all know that companies are being encouraged and sometimes pressured to take social stances in a way that they weren't prior.
Right.
And in a way that if they don't take a stance, people receive that as a stance as well. So there is this sense of, and then in our society, I think this happens with religion. I think this happens with politics. I think this happens with social issues. Um, there is a push toward, if I'm not in full ideological alignment with you, maybe we can't have Thanksgiving dinner together. Maybe we can't worship together. Maybe we can't work together. You have to, that some of the voices of our society are telling us that, right? You
Sure.
need to be
Yeah.
able to, if you can't fully agree with somebody on whatever the issue is, right? And it's different issues for different people, then how can you be in relationship with them? And that doesn't affect maybe the workplace to the same extent that it does these other cultural institutions, but it does, right? And so if somebody says, well, as a business, we're going to, the employer says we're going to do X or we're going to do Y, and it's not where you are personally, or you're not sure where you are, or it feels complicated to you, or yeah, maybe I can support that. I don't know that I want to jump on a task force to help it happen, or I would love to be on a task force. And I don't know how I feel about the fact that other people are resistant to it. I think that question of, can I work in a company and with colleagues that I don't fully align with, feels very significant to people. And I think, so first of all, did you have any of that when you were running businesses? Was that something that you had to grapple with maybe in the way that people are today?
Probably less so
Hmm.
because I own the
Yeah,
businesses.
right. You get to
So,
set some of the
so I was
values.
fairly aligned with what I was fairly
Yeah,
aligned with.
yeah.
So that to the greatest extent
Hmm.
made that not an issue. Where it would occasionally show up is in the alignment of how I would go about doing business, or even try to get new business with
Hmm.
what the clients would want and alignment with who they were.
Yeah, sure.
So that would show up, but I don't think nearly to the degree of what you're saying. And I think there's such an accusatory nature these days that it's real easy when there's not that alignment to hear that accusing voice of, how can you be a Christian and work at
Right.
X
That's right.
place
Yep.
or put up with this? And the reality is that probably there is a line where we say, well, I can't. But where's that
Hmm.
line,
Hmm.
and where does it exist with me? And so I can see that is just a huge place. And it's also just, I mean, how valuable to have a place like Needle's Eye to have those really complex
Hmm.
conversations.
Yeah, and I hope that it is a safe place for people. We're trying to make it that way because
Yeah.
you need to be able to talk about it and not feel like the person next to you is going to jump down your throat if you say the wrong thing. But most of us feel like, well, where do I have those conversations?
Yeah.
So absolutely, and I think connected to that, the issue that a lot of people are facing is they just don't feel all that known. They don't. There's a sense of loneliness, might be the right word, but it's a deeper thing. It's, can I really be myself around anyone? And I think that that does happen at work. If I have to wonder what the conversational landmines are all the time, well, then I can't just be myself. But even, I like to think that I'm not middle aged, but I probably am, and or at least getting there. And the amount of my friends who are basically in the life phase I am, dads with jobs, young families, trying to juggle a lot of things, great guys. But how many of the guys that I know, it's like it's all you can do to take care of your family responsibilities and your work responsibilities, and hopefully get to church on Sunday. And hopefully you can exercise some, but like to have hobbies or to have friends that you hang out with regularly, oh, when is that going to happen? Right. And so I think
Yeah.
there's this sense of disconnection. I think remote work is great for some things, but it is breaking some of those natural relational connections you have with people when you just walk down the hallway and you interact. Now, maybe you don't like your colleagues, so maybe it's kind of nice, but
Yeah.
you would have had human interaction that you don't have if you're working from your couch every day. And so I do think that some of the shifts in work have made maybe the technical side of doing our jobs easier, sometimes more challenging, and they have done some things really positively to create space for more people to be at the table in workplaces, which is great. But they've also made people, I think, live in a place of uncertainty and live in a place of disconnection. And one of the challenges of sort of this ideological purity thing is, whether it's with Christianity or otherwise, is at some point you have to have a kindness and a humility connected to it, or you just cannibalize yourself, right? So I'll just use Christianity because I'm not trying to talk about anybody that's different than me. But if I'm obsessive about how other people, if I'm obsessive about my own Christian faith, and then I'm obsessive about your Christian faith, at some point I'm just criticizing you for not being Christian enough. How could you work in an industry like that? How could you work at that business? And so now it's not enough for you to be a Christian. You have to be a Christian to the extent that I think you should be a Christian, or you have to be an advocate to the extent that I think you should, versus we're all human beings trying to figure this thing out. And are those things important? Yeah, I actually think they're really important, but can we have some kindness and humility for the fact that people aren't sure how to navigate them all the time, and create space for those conversations?
Yeah, and that's some of the civility that's missing today. And we're in great need. All right, so I'm going to throw a third question in, because I think it kind of dances around some of this stuff that you've talked about, and I know it's one of the big challenges. Is if you were to give one piece of encouragement or advice to someone who is trying to figure out how to do work-life balance, because it seems to me like that is just such a struggle point for almost everybody these days. Is they want to have a life, they want to have a family, they even want to have time to do things in the community, have hobbies, but it's just, how do we do all of this stuff? Because work is so demanding and everything, and it's such a challenge. Is there anything that's just stood out to you as, okay, it's a huge subject, I could tell you 10 things, but this would be like my top thing?
Top thing. Okay. Stop putting pressure on yourself to find the right balance. That's the main thing I would say. I don't think, in fact, it might have been Sean Boyer at a Needles Eye thing a couple of years ago that said this. He's not the only one, but he might have been the first person I heard talk like this. But you're not going to find a balance. You cannot perfectly balance at that intersection between your life and your job. In fact, work is part of your life. It's not in opposition to your life. So I think that more recently, because Needles Eye is actually sort of for 6 months trying to take people through that topic, and kind of how do you work well and how do you rest well, and how do those interplay between the two. And I think that as part of that conversation, one of the metaphors that's been used is the metaphor of a pendulum, right? So there's this back and forth. And so if you actually don't work all that hard, it's harder to rest. And we see that physically, right? You have a Saturday and you don't have much to do, let's say, and you're just kind of lounging around and you feel kind of aimless. Well, then you go out and do some yard work and you're exhausted. And now, oh, it feels great to put my feet up on the couch and watch a sporting event or something like that. Like, you can rest more fully because you worked hard. And so this idea that rest and work, or work-life balance, they're sort of synergistic, like they actually work together. And but for me, the change has been, I don't know what I thought that was supposed to look like, but I think it was something like, I'll have a job, I'll work pretty hard, I'll get paid enough money that I can do anything I want in my free time. I'll have lots of time for family and a ton of time for my hobbies and a ton of time for friends. And I can watch all the TV shows and sports that I want. And I can go on all the vacations that I want. And, at some point it's, what were you imagining? Right. No one has that. Right. And so, but it becomes something where it becomes this place of constant dissatisfaction, either with yourself or your job or your life, right? And you're just
Right.
upset that you can't hit whatever the ideal is. And I think it's different to just sort of say, well, what can I do, and how can I find kind of appreciation and joy in what I do have?
I think that is absolute. I think that is just great, profound wisdom. I actually, I didn't even think about it when I asked the question, but I have a short little chapter in my book, and I call it the work-life dance,
Mm.
because
Yeah, I love that
I
language.
think that visual of a dance, which sometimes is fast, sometimes is slow, it's much less, it's fluid, is to me a better way of framing something than thinking that we can get this, as you say, this balance. And if we operate with this imagination that there is such a thing as balance,
Mm-hmm.
then we are constantly frustrated, and then we've already lost the battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so I love that. That's really great.
Well, I love that language. The irony of me saying anything about this is that before my wife and I got married, and really a couple years into marriage, where she's a very healthy person, and she kind of uh, shaped me in that way. But I was just uptight and a workaholic, kind of like I've shared. I didn't have any balance. I wasn't even trying to be balanced, right? And so what's been helpful for me has been, one, her influence, but the biggest sort of practice that I try to do, and I don't do it every day, but when I do, it helps so much. Maybe it's two things. One is, find a time for some silence, because I'm a probably like all of us, I'm an information overload. Like, I want to learn everything about everything, and I'm constantly trying to. But the other thing is, and this has been the most helpful, is when I have a spare moment and I'm about to have 10 minutes or 5 hours to myself or family time or whatever, is just, I just will sit on the couch, or I'll go up into my bedroom, I'll close the door, and I'll take 5 minutes and just check in with myself.
Hmm.
What do I, okay, so, today's, as we're recording this, is Tuesday. So let's say, my kids are all having a good time or doing homework tonight. And let's say my wife is going for a walk with a friend or doing something, and I've got an hour. I could just use that hour, or I could sit down and I go, what do I actually want to spend this time doing? What would actually feel good at the end of this hour? I don't have anything that's staring at me. I don't have to do bedtime. I don't have to make dinner right now. And that has been so helpful. And I find that it's different things, different nights, but then it actually feels more satisfying. So if I go and I turn on Netflix, or I go, and I go lift weights or whatever, it's what I actually wanted to do, and it fills something in me, versus arbitrarily picking. And then at the end of the time going, what did I do tonight? I just kind of scrolled on my phone for 2 hours sort of mindlessly. And then what was that accomplishing?
Right. Yeah. No, it's true. Just we do very unrestful
Mm-hmm.
things with our little bit of free time that we have.
Yeah.
So that's great. All right. So my last gotcha
Okay.
question on it, that I think is a real challenge. I certainly faced this, in all of the years running business. Um, is it appropriate to share your faith at work?
Well, yes, but is my answer. Yes, but.
Okay.
Um, so if you think about anybody at work, is there anybody, whether you're a Christian or not, is there anybody that you want them to come and impose their belief system upon you? I don't think any of us really want that, right?
Right.
If I'm a Christian, I don't want somebody of a different faith system to try to force me to agree with them or to buy into their thing. So anything along kind of pressuring people, I don't think is actually good or healthy. And in fact, the Barna Group did this big research study in 2019, and they were basically just asking a representative survey of thousands of people in the United States, who would say, I'm not a person of faith. And they asked a number of questions, but kind of it boiled down to, are you open to a spiritual conversation with a Christian? Would you be okay with a Christian talking to you about the Christian faith? And the majority of people said, yes, I am open to that. But what I'm looking for is really two things. They will listen to me without judging me, and they won't pressure me to respond in the moment.
Hmm.
Basically, they'll respect me enough to have a real conversation.
Yeah.
Here's what I think. What do you think? Oh, let's talk about it. Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can get together and have lunch again in a couple more weeks, like that kind of thing, right? And but the majority of people they talked to said, "But I don't know anybody like that. I don't know
Wow. Ooh.
anybody like that." Right? Isn't that painful?
Yeah, that is.
And
Yeah.
what really strikes me about that is to be good at almost any career, regardless of your faith system. Uh, you have to be a pretty good listener, and you have to know when to pressure people and when not. Even in sales, right? Even in sales, you have to have a sensitivity of when do I keep pushing and when do I back off, right?
Sure.
Let alone in other careers. So most people, including Christians, have those skills. Maybe they form them professionally. They learn by being a teacher or an entrepreneur or a banker how to listen and how to interact with people and how to have healthy, respectful conversations. But do we kind of get out of that mindset when we're talking about spiritual matters and we start thinking, I think, putting pressure on ourselves and then putting pressure on the other person
Right.
because it's almost transactional. I need you to agree with what I say so that I feel good about myself and don't think I failed. And I just think that's not, I don't think
Yeah,
that's what other
that's
people
great.
want, but I don't think that's what God wants. I
Yeah.
think who you are and how you interact with people goes much further than can you spout off the right things in the moment and then sort of pin people down to make a decision. I mean, that's a sales pitch. I'm not a salesman. There are great salesmen and sales, I guess you still call them salesmen, but men and women who are great at sales and also have those skills within the context of being a Christian, which is awesome. That's a gift. I'm not that way. If I tried to act that way to you, if you were my colleague, it would come across so fake because I'm just not that person. And so, but I think, how do I treat people? How do I respond to success and failure? How do I respond to stress? Am I intentional? Do I, when you tell me something going on in your life, do I actually not just say that I'll pray for you? Do I actually do it? And do I ask you how you're doing? What are the things about, with Needle's Eye, we talk about transformation in your identity, which is not just that you're a Christian, but like the whole new self that God wants to bring you into, and how you think about your purpose, which really is about day to day and big picture decision making. Like how do you navigate the decisions before you, and then on whose behalf do you steward the influence and resources that you've been given? Because we think those are ways to just be who you are, who God has created you to be in a fuller way, but in a way that displays kindness, love, and excellence to other people. And so, if your decisions start to change just a little bit, and if you are opening doors for opportunities for people that wouldn't normally get those opportunities because God is compelling you to do that, we think those things are a really powerful, beautiful witness to who God is, much more than you know you're harassing people at the water cooler or
Sure.
on the Zoom call.
Yeah. Yeah. My hope in all of those years is that I would live in such a way that people would invite me
Mm-hmm.
to tell them what was important to me. Um, and I might have taken that too far in
Yeah,
terms of reticence to share,
it's hard to
but
navigate, right?
I wanted to err at least on
Mm-hmm.
that side to say, I want to wait for an invitation for someone to open up the conversation rather than be afraid of imposing or stepping on, into
Mm-hmm.
an area that someone wasn't interested or might be turned off by. So, as you say, it's a fine line, and there isn't a per se a right or wrong.
That's right.
But boy, you're going to be edging in the right direction if you're paying your primary attention to who you are
Mm-hmm.
more so than what you say.
That's right.
So
And
that's great.
it's sort of in the same way that you would, I would say if somebody says, "Well, I want to have more friends," I'd say, "Well, focus on what kind of friend you are," right?
Yeah,
It's the same way. If you want to be have an impact as a Christian in the workplace, well, focus on what kind of Christian you are. I love the way that you talked about trying to be the kind of person that if someone had spiritual questions or something hard was going on in their life and they just said, "I don't know what I believe, but I need somebody to pray for me," that they would want to talk to you.
right.
I think
Yes.
that's absolutely the way to go about it. I don't know that there's one size fits all. I think God calls us to different things in different seasons and in
Different
different
personalities,
ways.
right?
Right, right. But I think if you are the kind of person, I think if you just put your head down, do your work, and close yourself off, I don't really think that's the right way to go.
Right.
But I think if people, in whatever authentic, appropriate way that it comes out, have a sense that you're a Christian, and that can be as simple as, "Hey, what'd you do this weekend?" And you just choose not to filter out that you went to church.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, we watched the football game. I play with my kids. My kids played soccer. We had a great time at the pool. We went to church on Sunday. Just saying that, and then they can care or not care. They can ask follow-up questions or not, but you're not hiding that part
Sure. That's
away.
great. That's a good, simple way.
Yeah, so to
Yeah.
be that person. And then the other thing that we try to help people with is um, spiritual courage, right? So what does God want you to do? Not what are you pressuring yourself to do? What do you think other people expect you to do? What did you hear on a podcast that somebody else did? Maybe that's not your job. Maybe that's not for you.
Right.
But what does God want you to do? And it can be as simple as pray for somebody. It can be, and they may never know. It can be as simple as going out of your way to offer some encouragement or mentorship to somebody you know who's struggling. It doesn't have to be some extremely spiritual thing. God knows what people need, and He loves them, and He knows the best, most gracious way to love and serve people. So just asking Him and then being willing to do what He says.
Yeah. Boy,
Which
that's
sometimes is
great.
the hard conversation. Sometimes it's the letting the person go or giving them difficult feedback, right? It's not always the meek and mild. Sometimes it's the harder thing. But if you care about that person, you need to care about that employee enough to tell them the truth,
Yes.
right? Or whatever that
Yeah.
looks like. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, man, there are 100 places we could go with this. But instead of going to all those 100 places, I want to point people to the 100 places. That is, how do people get in touch with you and Needle's Eye and learn more about Needle's Eye? How do people connect with you?
Sure. Thank you. Well, I would say just if you're a person of faith listening to this, um, the first thing I'd just say is when you're reading your Bible, pay attention to how many times people with jobs show up and what it looks like for them to do their jobs. I think you will be shocked if you've never really thought about this before, and how many jobs are present within the scriptures and how much God has to say about work. I mean, just read the book of Proverbs. It's an easy place to start, and it's all about work and decision making. And so if you want to get connected to Needle's Eye, it's the word needle with an S and then EYE. So it's like camel through the eye of a needle, Luke 18. So needleseye.org is our website. And then from there you can get to our events where we have wonderful folks like Tommy come and share their stories and try to create those spaces for honest conversation. We do industry specific cohorts that meet quarterly where all the financial advisors can get together and talk about what it's like in that industry. And we have these for a number of industries.
Great.
We have a discipleship at work resource that we offer to small groups and to churches. And then just try to find creative ways to love and serve people, entrepreneur to entry level, kind of regardless of demographic, age, gender, ethnicity. We're trying to serve you if you have a job in Richmond, but maybe some of our resources could bless people who aren't in Richmond as well. We have a pretty robust video content library and some other online resources.
Yeah, some phenomenal resources. And as you said, I think one of the really neat growth places of Needle's Eye is it really crosses every demographic: men, women, every age group, color, the whole works. It's really an open, diverse group of people who are trying to figure out life and figure out faith and figure out work.
Hey, that's what our city looks like, and that's what God's kingdom looks like. So we ought to as well.
Yeah, it's great. Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and it could be a lot more. So maybe we'll have to have a follow up at some point. But great conversation. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you for having me. And I learned a lot from this conversation too. So it was great. Thank you, Tommy.
Super. Thanks everybody for listening. There's so many different things that we talked about in this conversation, but hopefully it will spark a lot of conversation on your end and really encourage you to be authentic in who you are, good, bad, and ugly, in your workplace and in all the places of your life, because that's how God deals with us. So thanks so much for listening. Share this episode with others, and we'll see you next week.